And
Zooty
we're
Zoot
live.
Zoot!
Zoot, zoot, zoot.
Hey! Welcome to the Zocalo. We are here, and guess what we're talking about tonight, everybody?
We are talking about, let me get my banner popping up here. Boom!
Day of the Dead, and you actually put Zoot Zoot on there. I'm so proud of you.
Well,
Good work.
It told me to do it. It told
Because
me
it
to
tells
do it.
you to.
Yeah.
Love it.
Harlan
Yeah.
Ellison's little spiritual box told me to put that banner up.
So yeah, we're going to discuss the one and only episode that Neil Gaiman wrote for Babylon 5, Day of the Dead.
Yep.
I'm Char. You're Norm. We are your hosts. And yeah, this is the Zocalo, where we talk about anything and everything connected to the Babylon 5 universe, our second favorite thing in the whole universe.
That's right. Maybe next to REEBO and ZOOTY. Although I have a little bit of an opinion to make about REEBO and ZOOTY. We'll hold that off until the show. You know?
I want to know what you think. Like,
Yeah.
one thing in my notes, because I took some notes this morning as I rewatched this episode, I needed a refresher. One thing I want to discuss, are REEBO and ZOOTY funny? Like, actually funny. So, a preview of things to come.
We just want to thank everybody for joining us and for giving up your Sunday evening.
Yes, and you know what?
For some. Yeah.
If you've got the Sunday scaries, we know the cure.
We do. It is Brikari time. So Valtu.
It is Valtu.
To everyone who's joining us and to everyone who will join us when they rewatch this later on.
Right. Or the ghosts of the people who watch us. We don't know.
Indeed.
John Bowersocks, how the heck have you been, buddy?
There you are. Haven't seen you.
Good to see you, sir.
In a spell. We missed you. We missed you.
Been a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. Good to have you with us. Before we actually get into the episode, I wanted to do just a tiny, tiny bit of background, just in case people don't know.
Sure.
The Day of the Dead is an actual thing. It is a Mexican holiday that, this is so timely too, begins on November 1st and ends November 2nd. We're on November 3rd, but we're pretty close.
Yeah.
And it's a celebration of those who have left us, because the belief is that death is something to celebrate. You celebrate the people who have gone. Instead of, it's not a tragedy, sad, crying thing. It's no, think about all the great things, all the good times that you had.
Absolutely. You know, sometimes, you know, for many of us who've experienced some type of like personal tragedy in our lives, a loss of a family member or loss of a friend or loved one.
Yeah.
A lot of the times that we're always focused on kind of like the very final moment of that person's life, as opposed to the entirety of the joy and all of the life that was lived. And we don't really concentrate on that as much.
Right. Yeah. It's so easy to remember the negative things, to remember the end because it's the last part. And a lot of times it's not the happiest part, as you'd mentioned. But no, I like this idea of remembering the good times, the happy things, the entirety of someone's life, the celebration of one's life. I feel like as a culture, we can and should do that more. Appreciate what we had rather than mourning what we don't have.
Do you think that when you started watching the show first, when you saw a lot of those kind of like candy skulls and candy lollipops and all of that, it was a little too design-wise on the nose to the Mexican culture of the Day of the Dead?
I mean, now that I live in Southern California and I know a little more about Day of the Dead, yeah, maybe. At the time, I didn't really think so, because I thought it was just some sort of little allegory for Halloween candy.
True enough.
Because they were talking, for those who can process sugary compounds, you can eat these.
You know, the one thing that's glossed over, though, in a lot of those props is that really beautiful comet pendant or pin.
Right. I love the decorations in this episode. Like the little things they're hanging up on the walls. It's little comets, little skulls. It's really cool.
Yeah, I love it too. I think it's really brilliant. And there are two parts to this story. One is obviously heavily weighted on the Day of the Dead, the Brakiri festival. The other part is not as slightly heavily weighted, but a little bit more of, I don't know if you want to try and say it's a balancing act from the seriousness of what's going on with the Brakiri Day of the Dead, with the appearance of REEBO and ZOOTY and what they have to offer in this episode.
I don't necessarily think there is some heavy content, but I don't even feel like it's much of a balancing act. I just feel like it's two stories just happen to weave into one evening.
Yeah, I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on how the A and B worked together, didn't work together, or
Right,
tried
did
to
they?
balance each other out. I mean, I have my own thoughts on that for later.
Yeah. Shout out to Terry Lynn, Colorado. Hello. I saw your messages on Twitter, but I haven't had a chance to say anything in reply, so I'm just going to say hello. I hope you got your whiskey.
And hope you're warm.
I hope it's a lot warmer than it was for you last week. Oh my gosh, the Rockies were frozen last week.
Faux shizzles.
And John, I hope you're feeling better.
Absolutely.
Okay, so as far as getting started, I mean, is there a place where you would like to start, Norm?
Well, I mean, the synopsis goes, did you write, should we go over a synopsis if anyone hasn't seen this yet?
You know what? Honestly, if they're tuned in, they've probably seen it. And if you haven't, stop this now, go watch the episode, and come back to us.
There you go. There's your synopsis.
We're going to hit a lot of spoilers. We don't need to necessarily review. I kind of feel like we have. We're going to celebrate the Brakiri Day of the Dead. We have REEBO and ZOOTY coming to the station and the shenanigans that ensue from there.
I think one of the things I wanted to start off with, I think that it was an interesting choice of the 4 characters that were focused on in the Brakiri Day of the Dead. That is Captain Lockley, Mr. Garibaldi, Lanier, who appeared on the station in between cycles of ranger training,
right,
and Londo. It's like that's a very interesting handful of characters that you wouldn't think would be, in a way, like work together as a story, as characters within their own sub-story.
Right, but it does make a unique selection of characters to interact with who eventually come along. You know, they're dead people whom they know and maybe love or maybe not. You know what is kind of interesting is there's like a 1 mile portion of the station that becomes Brakiri space. And so some people are in this area, many others are not. And there is virtually no planning, it seems, in terms of like notifying people about the Day of the Dead. Things aren't even finalized as far as purchasing this portion of Babylon 5 for the holiday until the day of. If this is a once in 200 year kind of holiday, don't you think they would have negotiated a little sooner?
I think so. And that's a really good kind of like real-time question, that there would be a lot of logistics involved. But I think that because of what Lockley said, and I think that when G'Kar stormed into her office while she was negotiating with the Brakiri ambassador, Lockley made it a point of making sure everyone understood the rules of the Interstellar Alliance and their tolerance for religious identities. So I think they tried to push that as quickly as they could through kind of like the writing door and just say, okay, look, all of that's aside, there are blueprints, there are contracts, there are permissions, all of that's good. Let's move on with the story, right?
Yeah, because the actual logistics of this whole thing, I have problems. There's questions. Because that's not how it would really work. But for the sake of the story, I understand. Get through the boring crap and let's have shenanigans. Otherwise, you would have somebody like G'Kar just saying, oh, heck no, find some guest quarters, for a night and down below or what have you. And,
right,
people could be a little more smooth about their actions. This jumbles it up. And, it's probably one of those things where, hey, it's a little bit of harmless fun. What could possibly happen?
And maybe that's what they were thinking. Maybe they were like, you know what? Seriously, like no one
really,
knew, no one knew that it was going to essentially transport not a square mile, but a mile long section of, what was that, Blue Sector? Because Blue Sector, and part of Green Sector, because that's where the ambassadors in Green Sector.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't know that it would have been kind of sequestered off into the Brikari home space. I mean, and I love how they handle this. It's just a mystery. There's no technobabble involved. There are no tachyon particles or inversing polarities or anything like that. It just was.
Right.
It's just a mystery.
The most technobabbly we get is when Garibaldi is trying to finagle the comm system so that Lockley can talk to CNC and Sheridan and whatnot.
And in the midst of being caressed by a very sexy, very ready to go Dodger. Sorry, I'm blathering.
You are having so many fantasies right now, aren't you? I mean, I'm not mad about that. I'm just calling you out.
I'd love Dodger. That's on
I
the
know
record.
You do.
It's on the record.
Hell, I mean, she is hot.
I've always liked her.
Hot.
I mean, I always loved her since Gropa. So let's go into kind of like the selection of the characters that we're talking about. Again, are Garibaldi, who is visited by Elizabeth Durham, who's Dodger, and we didn't see her. We haven't seen her since her death on Gropos in season 2.
Correct. So surprise.
So that wasn't. We're gonna kind of outline all the characters, who they were visited by, and how long it's been since we've seen them. So Adira Tari visited Londo Mollari, and she died, albeit off camera in a way, at the hands of
after fashion.
Right, at the hands of Lord Rifa in poisoning. And that's been a little bit of a while since we actually have seen the actress, Fabiana Udiano, I believe that's how you pronounce her
Good
name.
work. That's better than what I could do, but she is an Italian actress, correct?
Yeah.
Or at least of Italian descent.
She probably most notable for her appearance in Austin Powers, in the infamous hot tub
That's right. Scene. I forgot she did that.
Yeah, it was a lot of
vagina. Yeah.
A lot of facheche.
Something like that.
Yeah, and then we have, I'm going to get to the last more interesting choice. So we have Elizabeth Lockley visited by her best friend, who she hasn't seen obviously since her death, and that's Zoe.
Right.
Okay, so we have all these characters that have some type of personal connection with the people that are visiting them from the dead. And then we have Lanier, who's, again, they're on break between training cycles with the Unlost Shock, and he's visited by Mr. Morden.
Right. And let's not forget, Lanier he came to Babylon 5 and wanted to participate in the Day of the Dead because he's seeking wisdom. So it's interesting that Morden, of all people, of all the dead people in the universe, comes to visit Lanier to fulfill his wish? ? I think my answer is yes. Just spoiler alert.
There is kind of like an interesting little bit of a insider kind of byplay there with the whole, what does Lanier want?
Does he want the truth, or does he want inspiration?
And nobody answers, and nobody asks, what do you want better than Mr. Morden? However, I have to make a point of one thing.
Yeah.
So when Adira Tari returns, she looks very much like Adira Tari. Everything is there. Everything looks the same. Even Dodger has her fatigues, her Gropos fatigues.
She sure does.
And Zoe looks like what she probably looked like right around the time that she died.
Yeah, I mean, she's a new character. That's what we know of her.
But she looks like kind of, sick and hungry and cold, like Lockley
just as
described.
Lockley said. Right.
But then
they have a bad drug habit. Things are not good.
But then there's Morden with his new Grecian cropped hair. What happened there, hairdressers? Why did you not look at your continuity stills and make sure that Ed Wasser's Morden was properly coiffed?
You know what? I don't think there's many good hairdressers in hell. That's my only thought. Maybe
he was suffering from... Now, he did have great hair before he was cut. So, haircut from the shoulders up. So maybe, I don't know.
Maybe he's just letting himself go. He is dead. What does he got to care anymore?
Coffee. He still loves coffee.
It's true, and he would really like some, but apparently Lanier didn't get any.
So do you think that these choices were the choices that... Did they take you by surprise when you saw this the first time?
The first time, Morden definitely surprised me, because why Lanier of all people? Those two didn't have much of a relationship. Zoe's a new thing, so that was great in my opinion, because we finally got a little bit of Lockley backstory, and I was hungry for that, and so we got a glimpse, and I was eating that up. Now, as for Adira and Dodger, I mean, I love Dodger almost as much as you do. And Adira, I thought was a great choice for Londo. It gives him kind of like one last night of freedom and passion before he knows he has to succumb to his fate of becoming emperor. So I thought it was good choices all around, except Morden was a big question mark. The more I watch this episode, though, the more I kind of understand why this happened. It's not what Lanier wants, but it's what Lanier needs.
That's a great point to make. A lot of the dead that returned, they returned because maybe they needed closure, right?
Yeah, I say that's for Dodger and Adira.
Right, absolutely. And even to some respect.
And Zoe.
But yeah, Lockley gets closure from what Zoe admitted. Yeah. Because Lockley obviously wanted to know if Zoe purposefully killed herself from an overdose, and Zoe reluctantly did say yes. But with Morden, I think that is kind of like a be careful what you wish for when it came to Lanier, because
hell yeah,
at that time, Lanier wasn't the pure heart Lanier that we knew anymore.
Yeah, he's in the Rangers for the wrong reasons, right?
And I did read on occasion online in some forums that why wasn't Lanier visited by Marcus? And I think that if Marcus visited him, then you would have put the pin in Marcus is actually dead, as opposed to cryogenically frozen. And we saw this at the end of Sleeping in Light.
Correct. So it can't be Marcus because he's not dead.
But it would have been really interesting if it was, say, Valen. And bring back, but that would have been bringing back Michael O'Hare, which logistically would have been impossible.
Probably. I mean, if I'm thinking correctly, he might have been in a decent enough place, but I mean, it probably just would not have made enough sense to do enough justice to that character. I mean, he got his closure. It wrapped it up. Bringing him back one more time, really, I don't know if that would have done him any favors, both to O'Hare as well as Sinclair.
So I think that having Morden appear, first of all, it pays great fan service to all of the Morden fans out there.
Certainly.
And secondly, it really does kind of pose the question when you're watching it as to, will Lanier hear and heed his words?
I think as we go along in the series, the answer is no. But Morden is doing some serious mic dropping here. He is so direct to Lanier, and Lanier just, he can't hear it. He's not hearing it. He tells him, Morden, he's telling him, look, Delenn does not love you the way you love her, and she never will. Boom! That's harsh.
Yeah, and Lanier does respond with, it's like, I know that, but Morden's like,
no, you don't.
No, you don't. Not in your heart of hearts. It's like, I'm dead. I can see through the veil of all of your, all of what you think you believe, right?
Right. Which makes me wonder, what did Lanier really want? Who did he think he was going to see? Maybe he thought it would be Marcus because maybe he doesn't realize that Marcus isn't dead.
So let's shift off of Morden for a second.
Okay.
Londo wanted to see the very first Emperor. That's who he wanted to talk to. And I love, what did you think about his line about the cats? If I could be Emperor, if Vira can be Emperor, a human Earth cat could be Emperor.
You know what? I've got a line about that where I want mittens, to vote mittens for first feline Centauri Emperor.
That's just so funny that they bring up cats, knowing how much Joe loved cats.
Right, and that old harkening back to the, what goes quack joke.
Earth cats, cat, like nibbles.
You know what
quack.
I find really fascinating is that, there's different facets here where Lanier has come to seek wisdom. Londo is basically open to the experience. He wants to meet the first Emperor, saying, hey, please, maybe impart some knowledge that I can use, some wisdom, as I know that I'm going to descend into this role. And then Lockley, I feel like, is maybe neither here nor there. She just kind of thinks, okay, whatever. They're getting whatever they want. It's fine. Doesn't actually expect anything to happen. And I feel like Garibaldi's the same way. Do
you think that, I'm going to put this to everybody out there too, who's watching and listening. Do you think that the people that arrived, or the souls that returned, not exactly what they wanted, but exactly what they needed? Because Lockley obviously needed Zoe to return.
I would say that's true. Yeah. Now,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Now turning over to Londo and Adira, giving them maybe some much needed closure because she was torn away from him.
I also think that it was nice, like you said, for Londo to have one last true moment of happiness, because the road from here on in for Londo is a direct descent into darkness and losing everything.
This is the last bright spot for him. And so in a way, I'm just so happy for him that he took advantage of it when he could.
Yeah, I mean, it could have easily been, say, Emperor Turhan. Rifa would have been an amazing return, in my opinion. Right?
They would have been at odds for sure. They might have had they would have had it out with one another, perhaps. But would that really have done any good?
We wanted Londo to be happy because we know how we know how it all ends. So
yeah, he's so damned. He needs this.
but Dodger with Garibaldi was a really interesting choice because it's not like she was the most important person in his life. I mean, it very well could have been
Yeah.
What was her name? The girl who became Earth Force security, presidential security. Her parents, you
Oh,
know,
Tessa.
yeah, and not Tessa, the one who was in charge of Earth Force security in Survivors.
Oh, Liana Kemmer.
Liana Kemmer. It could have been Kemmer's her father, the one that he failed because he was always drunk. You know, the one that took him, the one that took the bomb for him. That would have been really interesting.
Oh, that really could have been, and especially with the way Garibaldi processes things when Dodger does show up. I mean, he thinks it's a telepathic experiment, and given all that he'd been through very recently with Bester, that's no surprise. You know, that might have really messed with his head so much that maybe we would have gotten the alcoholism story a little sooner. Might have put him over the edge.
Maybe.
Having to deal with that all over again, I think that would have been a little too much. So you know what? I'm glad it was Dodger. Because Dodger was always the one for Garibaldi who got away. You know? He could have had that stolen night of passion. He didn't go for it. She goes off to battle, is killed in action, gets one more chance. But there's Lise. And he's already at this point not going to ruin anything because of Lise.
That's a good point. And it was Lise that stopped him then, and it was Lise that stopped him now. So
yep.
So Dodger at least knows that, hey, you know what? This person really means a lot to you. Lise really means a lot to you.
Yeah, and they acknowledge that, and so she more or less acts accordingly.
So here's some really good feedback from Terry Lynn. Let's take a look at some.
Let's go to comments.
Here. So she says, "Does Morden's message push Lanier's jealousy to his later actions? Does Morden start? Does he light the fuse?"
You know, that's a really good question. I wonder if Morden's directness maybe pushed those thoughts that Lanier, he's got to know, but maybe it pushed them to the forefront of his brain, a little more conscious rather than subconscious. Mm-hmm. And another great comment she makes is that Lanier joined the Rangers for the wrong reasons, as did Marcus. And I would say Lanier joined for even worse reasons, but that is why he's going to fail later.
And if you really want to reference Come the Inquisitor, what Lanier said about Delenn and why Sebastian had to interrogate her is like, if the whatever you're working towards starts off for the wrong reason, the entire body of work becomes impure.
Right. And it's corrupted. And that is exactly what happens with Lanier. And you could also say the same for Marcus, too, just because his love for Ivanova overcomes everything.
Right. And I think that because of that, Marcus would choose Ivanova over, say, the greater good, because that's the result of that work starting off as being impure for the wrong reasons, as opposed to the self-sacrifice that Ranger's supposed to have.
Right.
You know what? The funny thing is that I asked you to lead the show.
Yeah, but you know what? You're doing just fine. We're back and forth, back and forth. That's the way it should be.
Have I like glossed over anything yet that you wanted to talk about?
Not yet.
Okay, so let's pivot over to the whole REEBO and ZOOTY storyline.
Let's do that.
Because there is a little bit to talk about there. First things, did you expect to see Penn and Teller as REEBO and ZOOTY?
No, I did not. And I gotta own up to something. I didn't even really know who Penn and Teller were until I saw them on Babylon 5. I wasn't aware of who they were.
Yeah, Penn Jillette and Teller, I don't remember his full name, but I've seen them before. They're kind of like comedy / magicians, and their magic is awesome. They had this great skit on David Letterman where they took David Letterman's watch, wrote a tag on it, like tied a tag to it. David Letterman wrote something on it that only he knows, took the watch and did this whole disappearing act. 10-15 minutes later, they brought out a cart of fish on ice, like literally like giant salmon on a cart of ice. They cut open the salmon, busted open a package inside the salmon, and unfolded this packet, and there was his watch with the note on it. I'm like, what? Anyway, that's just an aside.
All right. And they've been doing Vegas for years. If you go to the Rio, that's where they are. Yeah,
they're a very famous act. Kind of a modern day Laurel and Hardy, if you will.
A little bit. Yeah, they're comedy on Babylon 5 anyway, and I've not seen a show of theirs, so I don't know if this is a big aspect of their show or if it's more magic, but they tended to do a little more physical comedy. Who does Who's on First?
Abbott and Costello.
Thank you. It was Abbott and Costello-ish to me.
Very much.
Very physical, kind of old-fashioned. And so I want to bring up the question, are these guys actually funny? Or did they do one really good thing one time and then the hype around them just kept them propelled into the spotlight more and more to the point where it was so oversaturated that it took over every channel Lockley was switching through?
Well, humor is very subjective. I just came back from watching Joker, Joaquin Phoenix's like tour de force performance. And one line really stuck with me because I was thinking about this show as I was watching that movie or talking about this show on this episode. And one of the things that the Joker character says, that he says, all humor is subjective. Who decides what's funny and what's not funny? All humor is subjective. Some people think that Dave Chappelle's the greatest comedian that ever lived. And obviously in the outrage culture, some people think that, he's a monster.
Right.
But that's the thing with not Penn and Teller, REEBO and ZOOTY. They are just subjective comedians who obviously they want to give up comedy for politics. And I think that in some way, Neil Gaiman was kind of poking fun at the fact that they're one and the same thing, depending on what coin you're on, what side of the coin you're on.
I would agree that that's even acknowledged to some extent that as comedians, they were allowed to say more things against President Clark than they ever would have been able to as politicians.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But because they weren't taken seriously, Penn and Teller, REEBO and ZOOTY, felt like what they were doing didn't matter. So are they going to pull something like an Arnold Schwarzenegger or a Jesse Ventura and run for Senate? We never did find out.
No, we didn't. That's actually a really cool, interesting thing. And here's
REEBO and ZOOTY 2020, Zoot Zoot.
Great T-shirt. If you have T-shirt artists out there, maybe maybe they'll go up on our T Public page.
We should.
So, did you know that Penn and Teller? So Penn Jillette is the talker, and Teller is always silent. So they didn't break character even for their Babylon 5 personas, which I thought was actually pretty interesting.
Even better, though, than that is the cast's reactions to Penn and Teller. I think it's in the book that you gave me. It's like an unofficial guide to Babylon 5 that goes through every episode. Apparently, Bruce Boxleitner didn't care for them too much. Mira Furlan, on the other hand, thought they were hilarious and said, I'm going to go to Vegas sometime and see a show. Who knows if she did. But even the Babylon 5 cast on the show is a little mixed. Lockley, not caring for it. Everybody else seems to get into it and they're a little beloved. Is it one of those things where, because it's guy humor potentially, that it's going to get lost on some people?
Yeah, it's just a weird thing. Like, I personally am not the biggest fan of that storyline at all.
Well, you're not.
No.
I do find it interesting that, I like the conclusion of it where they're talking about, politics and comedy and maybe trading one profession for the other. But otherwise, it's a nice little showcase for Penn and Teller. And yeah, it's just all right.
I mean, I don't dislike it. It's just one of those things. Like I sometimes when I look at an episode, I look at the two different storylines and do they complement each other? Yes or no. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. In this case, I feel like a lot of kind of the weight and maybe more of the exposition of what this Day of the Dead should be. Some of that time could have been shaved off of the REEBO and ZOOTY storyline and given more towards the Brakiri Day of the Dead storyline, because it was so fascinating for the characters that were interacting with their, I guess, from the other side counterparts. Right.
Now, is there any one particular visit you would have wanted to see more of, get more detail from?
Oh, that's interesting.
Because I have an answer.
I mean, per character?
Yeah. I really wanted to see more with Lockley and Zoe.
Yeah.
I wanted to get to know Zoe a lot more, and I wanted to learn more about Lockley. As a result, we just scratched the surface oh so barely on those two, learning just a little bit about her past. And given that this is a new character, they could have done more with it, and it would have been satisfying.
What I think that this episode did for Lockley was that it finally gave us a reason to empathize with her.
Uh-huh.
Because
that's one thing.
I mean, up until this point, Lockley was we didn't really know a lot about her. We know that she's Earth Force. We know that she's just very buttoned up. And we haven't really seen anything from her personally. We haven't seen behind the veil of her Earth Force persona.
Right. We know who she is as an officer and as a commander. But
Right.
this is where we get to know the person and who she was before and maybe why she is the person that she is. And
Right.
there's a lot that's going on between the lines, too. You know, they're not necessarily talking about what drugs they did. They weren't necessarily talking about, I mean, they gave little details about what sort of living conditions they're in, but Lockley says something about just like, oh, the things that we did to get by. They don't mention what exactly those were, but obviously it was bad. You know, they were not living well.
I'm gonna have to mea culpa. Slice of Sci-Fi just popped in. She said, "Sorry, the reminder on the video said 10 p.m. Eastern. I was duped, and I'm sorry if I wrote that. I usually don't make that mistake."
Oh no! Oh well, Slice of Sci-Fi. I'm so glad that you're here because you guys on Twitter. I believe this is Summer talking. She says she's got all sorts of things that she can talk about on regarding this episode. So I'm here for it.
I'm here for it too. You know, and let's let's just rewind. Let's rewind all the way back.
Can we just start over?
Start all over again.
Oh man. No, we can't. So we got to keep going.
I agree with what you're saying with Lockley, and I think that you become connected to a character when you see characters' flaws and when you see that they're human. Like Garibaldi, for example. You know, we become more sympathetic towards him because you know that he's struggling with an addiction. You know, we become sympathetic towards characters because we understand kind of like the deep dark secrets, the skeletons, the stuff they sweep under the rugs. And we've had, you know, with many of the characters, we've had, you know, 4, maybe 5.25 seasons to see that happen. And right up until this point, you know, even though that she's only had a handful of episodes, Tracy Scoggins hasn't really like emotionally connected with us as Lockley. And when she turns around and she sees Zoe, and you just see how heartbroken she is. Okay, I'm like, this is it. This is that moment where we finally connect with why she is how she is.
Right. It explains a little bit about maybe why she's kind of a hard ass on the job. Yeah. Another thing, reading between the lines that we learn about later, she says something like, after everything he had done, referring to her father, she was happy to see him when he went to come pick her up after Zoe was gone. Well, we didn't know at that time that Lockley's dad was an alcoholic, and she'd probably been in a somewhat abusive relationship with all of that happening. But that was a tidbit of what was to come, and that was so cleverly put in there.
Right. It's a nice tip to just furthering on and kind of unpeeling the layers of her character. What I also loved in a lot of what she was talking about, like, you know, when she was looking at the schematics and the Bab consistent says, you know, password, insert password here. And she said, Zoe's dead. Obviously that moment was probably one of the most profound moments of her life.
Also a big reality check. I kind of felt like she was using that to keep herself grounded, to keep from getting carried away in the moment.
Right. Every single time she has to verbally introduce the password into the system, she has to say that.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Reality check.
Exactly. She's like, Zoe's dead. Okay. It just reminded me of everything.
She might be right there, but she's still dead.
And it was, I really like the actress who played Zoe. She was very fragile, very vulnerable. And you could see that if she went a different way, you know, she could have been kind of like a girl next door, you know, like very sweet.
Certainly.
You know,
yeah, if she had cleaned herself up, maybe she would have had all those kids that she wanted, and
right, you know, a family,
had a nice happy family, and who knows?
Yeah.
Slice of Sci-Fi says, I merely have educated suppositions and Tim is just plain wrong. Well, Tim is not here, so you know what? You go do you, boo. you got this.
He can't defend himself, so go have at it.
You know what? That's none of our business. We're not here to defend him. Right. Also, you guys, if you're not listening to the Babylon podcast, which Summer does, they just did an interview with Dodger Marie. Oh God, what is her name? Blanking.
I know you wrote this down.
The lady who played Dodger. That's who she is. So, Summer, I would love to know if you have any behind the scenes trivia about this episode that you would like to impart on all of us. If you've got any, Marie Marshall, thank you. If you've got any information you want to, drop on us, I'm here to learn. I'm like Lanier. I am here I came to learn.
So that makes her Morden then.
Oh, I didn't mean that. Sorry. No. I wouldn't wish that upon. I wouldn't wish that bad hair upon anybody.
Exactly. So that's what I want to know. Slice of sci-fi. I want to know what the heck happened to Ed Wasser's hairdresser. Right? Was what that did they all leave at the end of season 4, and did they not get that like the regular hairdressers back for season 5 when they got their TNT crew? I don't know, but that bothers me so much.
We had already talked about this extensively in the first half hour, but we need answers. Desperado.
Do you know who would have been a really, really interesting, like, I don't know, because he did die in a way, but he didn't die, and there's so many versions of him out there, would have been Zathras.
But which one?
Exactly. Like
that would have been far too confusing.
That would have been an interesting choice for Lanier, though. Right.
I don't know how much we would have gotten out of that. I mean, Zathras would have just gone on to some really weird timey-wimey rants.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is the wrong tool. Yeah. No, never read this. Delenn does not love you. She's not the one.
She's not the one. Not the one. This is wrong tool. So okay, so we've talked about Zoe and Lockley quite a bit, and we've talked about Lanier and Morden quite a bit. But let's talk about Londo and Adira, because I really do love.
Hang on, can I cut you off here?
Sure, go for it.
All right, because Summer says I have theories about why Morden appeared to Lanier. I would love to know what some of the prevailing theories are. We already kind of expressed ours because he needed a serious mic drop. Lanier did. But if you've got more, please share.
Well, why didn't Naroon appear to Delenn in the Day of the Dead?
They weren't in the zone.
Yeah.
So they weren't getting appeared to nobody.
I'm pretty sure she meant Lanier.
Oh, now that would have been an interesting choice, because I would think that Naroon would mic drop just as well as Morden.
Yeah, but wouldn't have been a controversial.
Truth. Right?
It's kind of like because Morden really was he was the figurehead, he was the embodiment of the Shadow's influence, and kind of like the ambassador of evil on Babylon 5, for the Shadows, right? So anytime he shows up, you don't know exactly like what information he's going to bring, why, and for what reason, and who to influence. So I mean, Terry brought a really good point up. Terry Lynn Colorado brought a really good point up when she said that Morden could have influenced Lanier to go in a certain direction. And maybe that's what he wanted. Maybe he wanted to stick it to Sheridan one last time.
Maybe.
From beyond the grave.
Morden's, the fact that it was him helped set that up, perhaps.
That's a really interesting point. Like, you know what? I don't know I can't affect the living in a way, but I got this period of time where I can say, like, you know what? I'm going to make Lanier kind of like my agent of evil, and he doesn't even know it. That time bomb has been planted yet, While
also just being the bringer of truth to Lanier, and Lanier just can't hear it. He can't process it right now.
If only they gave Morden coffee, he may have been completely different. That's all I'm saying.
In what way?
Yes, he just would have been cooler.
Really hyper?
No, he just would have been mellow. He'd have been like, because he's just like, give me coffee, man. Give me coffee. I'll be cool.
Sip some coffee. Let's talk. What do you want?
So Slice of Sci-Fi says, Kosh sent a message about the future for Sheridan. Morden was a message for Lanier about his future. Call it a message from one person who betrayed his own to another who would betray his own. That's true.
Whoa! Them some good words.
I don't, here's the thing though. I'm gonna look at that and say, call a person who betrayed his own to another who betrayed his own. Morden, by that time when he was taken out by the Shadows, I mean, they were dead. They were kind of like, they were repurposed. They were repurposed by the Shadows.
Kind of like Frankenstein. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like, Mr. Morden, who was on the Icarus, he was like, okay, you give me a choice. I'm either going to not live or betray my people. But I don't think he had that choice.
Not necessarily. I don't know. You'd have to ask Morden.
Yeah, you'd have to ask Morden. Morden sold out Earth for personal gain via the Shadows. I don't think there's any evidence to that, though. On screen.
Well, I mean, if he had agreed to ally himself with the Shadows, then yes, he did.
But we don't know.
And then he was working with the Senate. He had contacts. So I think that's true.
Yeah, but the thing is it Morden, or is that the Shadows Frankenstein version of Morden?
Well.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, at this point, they're kind of one and the same, really, I guess, is what we got to go with.
Yeah, but the thing is that when you have somebody that has their own consciousness and choice, then they're choosing like the Benedict Arnold that situation. But if they've been that this just turned into some type of puppet with the shadows programming, that's not their choice. It's just what they want him to say.
True. We also have to consider that once you're touched by the shadows at all, you're never quite the same person again.
I don't disagree with what the theory is. What Slice of Sci-Fi is saying is just that there's no on-screen evidence for it that I remember.
Oh, I mean, you might be right.
You know,
I can't recall any myself right now.
Anywho, so let's kind of let's aside that, and that's actually those are really good points. I love that deep dive stuff.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
So let's go into Garibaldi and Dodger because again, Garibaldi could have had so many different people show up from his past. We know that he has a sordid past. It would have been interesting if, say, for example, his second in command that was shipped off to Earth Force, maybe he was murdered and maybe he came back and said, "Hey, you know what? I have something to tell you. You were right the whole time."
That would have been crazy.
But then again, we wouldn't have gotten Maurice Marshall, and I wouldn't be drooling all over the TV screen.
And also, Dodger was such a memorable character. I mean, she was only on for one episode, but everybody knows the name Dodger. We know who she is. She just made that much of an impact.
I love the nickname Dodger too. It reminds me of the Artful Dodger.
Nice.
Right? Or maybe she's just really good at she's really good at dodging projectiles and explosions.
Well, I don't want to say this, but not good enough, apparently.
Yeah, apparently. Well, the whole that whole attack was.
Yeah, sorry.
That was
I love you, Dodger.
But the one thing that I brought up to you before we started recording is that the one thing that ties all of these four characters together is they all died violent deaths.
Right? This is such a cool connection that you made just prior to the show.
It was the Brikari. Brikari makes everything clearer.
Sometimes.
Right.
But then it blurs it too. It just depends on how much.
But that in that blurriness comes clarity of truth.
Sort of like when Kaylin James holds up the glass to Franklin and she sees multifacets of him.
There you go. Right?
Like a little kaleidoscope. It's like that.
Somebody watched an episode recently.
Right? Not too terribly long ago. We did it for Babel for 5, my other Babylon 5 thing.
So with Dodger, I love that she has like no arcane wisdom to speak of. Like she said, she has nothing from the afterlife. And that's something that I also wanted to bring up is you have these characters that are coming back from, they're not ghosts. They're not spirits. They're not like apparitions. They are just, what are they?
Right. We don't really know.
And how does the Brakiri technology do that?
Again, we don't know. And that's the nice suspension of disbelief you have to go with this episode is the logistics of that don't matter. Right. It just happens.
So, I mean, in writing and in producing a TV show, you have a certain amount of asks that you can ask of the audience. Asks meaning that you have to suspend your disbelief and you can ask so many different things. One of the asks that does work, but does kind of like, catapult a lot of questions is what are they in terms of a spiritual sense? Like they're still physical. Obviously Dodger retained all her memories or else she wouldn't like make fun of, you got old Garibaldi, it could have been great. She has the whole thing with Emily Dickinson and the Yellow Rose of Texas and all that stuff. Zoe obviously has they all have their memories and feelings and they remember their lives. So they're not telepathic. They're not telepathic projections. They're not something from a hallucinogenic gas. They're not this. They're not that. They are the real people.
But they also know that they are dead.
This is also true, and they also know that they have been summoned by this Day of the Dead.
Yeah, yeah. Right? I enjoy that mystery aspect to it. I don't need that explained away. I don't care.
I kind of do care.
Really? Because I just feel like that's the fun of the story.
But see, that's where like the whole REEBO and ZOOTY thing, like take that chunk of storytelling and give me more of the reason.
Right? I guess it's that whole science versus faith thing, You either want to know the answer behind why something that seems so incredibly magical is happening, or you can go with it and say, hey, there are things out there that I can't explain.
I totally get that, and I dig that, and I wanted it to be pushed more. I guess that's what I wanted. I wanted science versus faith to be pushed more, and like why we don't really know much about the Brikari at all as a race. Like we know more about the Drazi than we do about the Brikari. right?
It's true. I mean, yeah, our knowledge of the Brakiri at this point is still not very good. This is probably the most we learn about them, actually, come to think of it.
So understanding that they have this ability, and once again, it only happens once every 2 centuries.
200 years, and it's only when a certain comet comes by. So the comet is what has the magical powers.
That is a great point.
May the comet be with you.
But what's in that comet that does that? What does it do? Does it like
magical stardust, baby?
Well, Slice of Sci-Fi says that the universe breaks itself into pieces and gathers them back together and try to understand itself. Something the Brikari mystics do reconnect with those old pieces and anchor them through the people. I mean, it ties
That's
back.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can go with that.
I can see that Summers maybe, I don't know, thought about this a couple times.
Maybe just a little. I love it. That's really good writing, and it's beautifully told with a good kernel of thought there.
Yeah. I do thank the universe then for breaking itself apart and gathering itself back into the form of Marie Marshall.
There you go. Right? And lest we forget, we are star stuff.
That's right. We are the universe.
We're all out there. We're all the universe made manifest. Yeah. We're all out there.
So I know that you have copious notes. So is there anything that I have not yet reviewed?
Yes, there's one thing. There's one big thing that we have not discussed yet, and that's G'Kar.
Ah, yes. Good point. Thank you very much.
Yes, yeah. G'Kar is the one who is saying, Captain Lockley, you don't know what you're doing. This is crazy. Don't do that. I love how Lockley throws down the gauntlet about, tolerating religious beliefs and customs and what have you. And, kind of throws his own words back in his face to the point where he just has to walk off in frustration and let this happen because it's out of his hands. Right. But then, of all places on the station, he comes up to CNC to sleep the night away because his quarters are in the Brakiri territory.
I don't think, have you ever fallen asleep in a really busy hub? Like a dorm room or a common room or anything like that?
I can't.
It's impossible.
Yeah, like people who sleep in airports, I don't know how they do it.
It's unless G'Kar had a bunch of, I don't know, he had whatever he drinks. But
or maybe he's a really hard sleeper.
Maybe he's like, don't wake me up, don't bother me, don't wake me up.
Right. Then he's out and that's it. He's gone for the night.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you is that, G'Kar being the spiritual person that he is and the revelation that he had with Lockley at the end saying that I was wrong because I lost the opportunity to have been visited by somebody. Who do you think he wanted to visit? And who do you think would have visited him?
I'm so glad you brought this up. This was a big question that I had. And you know what? If we did not know that Na'Toth was alive, it would have been Na'Toth. Yeah. They could have written that.
Yeah.
She'd been presumed dead. And that would have been cool. That would have been closure for him.
Yeah, with Na'Toth for sure. It could have been his father. It could have been Jaquan himself.
Now that would have been interesting.
But here's the person that I really, really, really wanted. It's like it would have been really interesting for G'Kar to have be visited by that assassin of the Thenta Makor.
Oh,
because I always wanted to know what happened to that person.
Okay, I never would have thought about that. Wow, that's a deep cut.
Like going all the way back to season 1, and like the Black Rose assassin, and that, it's just like you don't remember those characters, but all of a sudden you have this guy come back and say like, "Hey, look, it was just me and a job. I'll answer anything you want. Whatever. Because obviously, Jaquan would have been huge, but that would have been too huge.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh God, I love Slice of Sci-Fi's comment about G'Kar. If it had been Jakar's father showing up and saying, "Yo, it wasn't me who talked you down from your dust trip."
Right. No. that
would have been great.
Then
who was it?
Straight up wrecked him. Straight up
wrecked him. That would have tripped him out. I think he would have been done at that point.
Or, what would have been really cool? I said Londo and Rifa before, but what if it was Rifa that appeared to Londo and says, like, "I'm sorry"?
You think Rifa would have actually done that, though?
I don't know. But it would have been interesting to write. If anyone has the talent to write that, it would have been Joe and Neil Gaiman, obviously.
Sure. I just have a hard time Rifa swallowing his pride like that.
Well, he's dead. He has nothing left.
He has no pride.
Yeah, he has nothing left to prove. Or maybe he's like, you know what? Look, You don't know Malari is, maybe he would have tried to seed something against Malari.
Or would Malari, or would Rifa have maybe tried to warn Malari about what was coming?
Maybe.
Giving him a little more information, maybe on how to fight the Drakh or something like that, or just basically a watch your back kind of thing.
Summer, we did talk about the old emperor, the first.
We did.
The first emperor giving Londo advice, or Emperor Turhan, perhaps. But Emperor Turhan, he already gave him like the last bit of advice that
that's
needed,
done.
Yeah.
Now, here's a thought. What if Emperor Kartaja had visited Jakar?
Oh.
What the F would have happened there?
Bring back Wortham Krimmer. Oh my God. That would have been amazeballs. Wow. That's amazing. Was that you talking, or was that your Brikari talking?
That was me with the Brikari.
That's amazing.
Under the influence of the Brikari.
So I'm going to bring back something that Summer just said. She said, I've been arguing with Tim about this for over 10 years. Theories are put forth under duress and alcohol.
You know it, baby. It's the best and only way.
Okay, so let's do something here. Let's say that if the REEBO and ZOOTY line didn't exist, and certain ambassadors were also part of this Day of the Dead, who would Sheridan have been visited by?
We want to say Kosh, right? That's the easy choice. That's not the best choice, though. And it can't be Anna, because we've got enough closure with that. I'm at a little bit of a loss, just because he still has his sister. His mom and dad are still alive. I'm not sure. Let's take that to our listeners.
What about his old captain? Back from the Battle of the Line.
Oh, or what if it had been General Haig?
Or General Haig.
Oh, no. Okay, that would have been interesting, but what would have come out of that?
I don't know. This is all speculation right now. It's kind of like, who
honestly, I don't think that would have been a good idea. No.
So let's go back to...
So who would have Delenn seen? It would have been Narun, right?
Or Dukat.
Yeah. Dukat. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. In a way, the episode, what is it? Not Revelations, where she has the dreaming. Atonement.
Atonement, yeah.
That kind of was a little bit of closure with Dukat.
I would have liked to have seen, let's see, who was it? It was the Unlash Shakna from In the Beginning. Uncle Yosel, the actor, that guy. I keep thinking Uncle Yosel.
Oh, I love Uncle Yosel.
Okay, so we'll have the listeners kind of chime in on that. But what about let's go through the cast. Like, okay, so sure. Sheridan, Delenn, who would Ivanova have been visited by?
Well, I mean, it would have been Marcus, but we know that he's not dead. So probably her father or her mother. Her mother.
Oh my God, that would have been amazing.
Definitely her mother, and it would have just ended in a puddle of tears.
I won't swear. I would have fracking cried.
We all would have cried, and so would she.
Right.
But it would have been really cathartic, and it would have been really good.
Summer thinks it would have been her brother.
That's a good one, too.
Yeah, I mean, Ganya would have been interesting, but...
There's more pain with her mother, though.
Like closure with her mother.
She needed the closure even more with her mother.
Yeah.
Because, yeah. Her mom faded away. Her brother was killed in action.
What about Franklin?
Who would Steven have seen? I don't know. Is it a little too soon for Kaylin James?
I personally think he would have seen Sean.
You think? Now that would have screwed him up. But you might be right.
You know how much I love Believers, man.
Yes. Oh, now that would have been good. That would have been really good.
Yeah. And just, he said, like, you did the right thing kind of thing,
It would have been a really short part of that story, though, I think.
But yeah, I still would have, like, so I'm not a big fan of the REEBO and ZOOTY storyline, just because I don't really think it goes anywhere from a narrative standpoint. Like I don't think that, like, it's kind of like, why?
Yeah, it's just like everybody's a little starstruck. They visited Babylon 5. I mean, it dominated that newspaper, even over Malari.
Right. Everyone who like flips open the newspaper, it's like REEBO and ZOOTY, ZOOTY and REEBO, and then
And
Lockley
then, oh
goes through
yeah, and
all
then
the.
Londo's going to be the
Yeah.
emperor. Yay.
I mean, I get that. I get that. That has to be a big thing, but I just feel like I'm going to say something that's probably not popular opinion, but being a Neil Gaiman fan, I don't think that's Neil Gaiman at his best.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You know, that's just me.
All right. Now, I got to make a confession. I need to be a better student of Neil Gaiman's work. There's a lot of things that I need to catch up on. So, you know what? My opinion is neither here nor there on that right now.
No,
I have I have a lot of reading to do.
Yeah, I mean, well, he's a legendary writer, obviously in the comic field, and he has like a lot of his own projects, but it's just that I just like seeing the Day of the Dead storyline and how it would have affected more people on the station.
Sure. In a way, I kind of wish it had been the whole station. Nobody can get out of it.
That would have been interesting. Yeah.
That would have been kind of cool.
But I do like the whole like rubber force field wall thing.
I love how Sheridan throws the fire extinguisher at it. I almost felt like, the Sheridan solution of nuking everything. I'm a little surprised he didn't even think about it. We gotta punch our way through there. I gotta get him.
See, I love so Summer says, frankly, seeing Sean would have been poignant. You know what I'm saying?
Yo.
Who would Marcus have seen had he had been there? Maybe his brother.
That's the first thought I had was his brother or his mom and dad.
Yeah, somebody.
But probably his brother.
But the cool thing is that you get to see characters like Zoe that are part of someone's past that we haven't seen. I mean, like Zach. That it would have been interesting to see like who Zach would have seen. Who Lita would have seen.
And the thing with Zach is we don't have a whole lot of backstory on him to really know much about who he might have seen from his past. Like with Lockley, that could have been an introduction to more character development for him.
Exactly. And we get a lot. I mean, obviously like Zach had his moments, say like in Third Space or River of Souls, like the made for TV movies were a little bit more of kind of like his area to stretch. But it would have been neat to see, say, other characters that are secondary characters that would have seen a little bit more backstory from them.
Yeah. All right. Is there anybody that we're missing?
I don't. Not from the main cast. I mean, Sheridan. We're not really sure. Delenn. We hope. Let's see. Garibaldi is Dodger.
Yep.
And the Franklin, I think, would have been Sean. That would have made.
Oh, what about
sense
Veer?
Oh, you know what?
Veer's not in this episode.
No, he's not. But I think Veer probably. See, the thing is that I think that Veer should have been visited by Morden. That would have been amazing.
That would have been interesting. Although, right? Okay, if Veer were to make an appearance in this episode, wouldn't it have been funny if he'd been off the station at this time and he comes back and he says, "I can't believe I missed the Day of the Dead. You've got to tell me everything that happened." And all Londo can do is give this real resigned sigh. Yeah. Because Adira's gone.
It would have been funny if they like toasted something and all of a sudden he just passed out. Just fell backwards and passed out.
There's all the empty bottles of Brikari. And Londo's on the bed entirely. Passed out. Veer comes in. Yeah. What happened?
So before we wrap this up, and I'm really, really sorry that this is only kind of like an hour-ish long format, but I wanted to ask you something, and it's something that really kind of this is like one of those profound personal moments for myself. Like who if we were on the station, who would you have been visited by, if you want to say, or if our listeners would want to say, who would you like to have been visited by, or who would you want to see?
Okay, and this person needs to be gone, correct?
According to the rules, yeah.
Ooh, okay. I need to think on this. Do you have an answer?
Well, it'd be my father.
Okay. Talk about that for a second. I'm going to think.
Well, for our listeners out there, and this is a very personal moment, but it's easier for me to talk about now than it was years ago. I lost my father to cancer in 2011 from leukemia, and he was, he's that role model, much like John Sheridan's father was the role model to him. He basically taught me everything, and he had that whole, don't start a fight but always finish it, that kind of advice.
Yes.
So the only thing that I probably would really want to know from him is that if he's okay, if the afterlife for him is okay,
That's cool. Yeah. That's kind of the answer I came up with in a fashion.
Yeah. And that's, it's It's taking probably every iota of strength not to break down into tears right now talking about him, because my
Oh,
father was everything to me, you know.
well, I really
But
appreciate you sharing
yeah,
and opening up.
it's easier to like I said, it's easier to talk about it now and put it in the context of what this is, because I mean, think about what Walaka was going through. I mean, she lost her best friend. She sees her best friend all of a sudden. You know, if my father appeared to me, you know, on Babylon 5, you know, in the context of how he passed away, I don't know how I would have handled it.
It would have been really difficult, right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't
Hell
know
yeah.
like all these things, you know. But yeah, at the same time though, I just want to make sure that, you know, it's like, are you happy in the afterlife? Like, and I want to know that I'm happy here, you know,
Right.
in the real world, you know. So there's this whole kind of like, you know, tethering of spirituality where you want to make sure that the loved ones that you've said goodbye to, or are in a better place, you hope, you know, that this challenges the whole aspect of faith,
It
you know.
does. It does, because you have to have that leap of faith in order to believe in it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So my answer, I was not really sure where I was going to go, but I kind of landed on my maternal grandfather who died in 2007. He had lung cancer, got diagnosed at stage 4, never really had a chance, tried to fight anyway, and it just, it didn't work out. And it was really hard watching him decline and then be gone. So I would ask him a lot of questions, honestly, like, how are you? Are you okay? Are you suffering anymore? Do you watch us? Do you check in from time to time? Are you happy with the way things have gone since you left us?
yeah.
Those sorts of things.
And that's not so much like the arcane wisdom. I think that that Garibaldi was asking Dodger. I think that the whole thing is what's it like? You know, like, you know,
Yeah.
what is the afterlife? Like, what does it
What's your
mean?
existence?
Yeah.
What do you do with your
Yeah.
time?
I mean, are you hungry? Do you get cravings for pizza? You know, do you want to watch movies? I mean, you know, like things like, like
Is there pizza in the afterlife? I need to know right now, because if there's not, I'm out.
right, because we're talking about like very, very, very high level, like kind of like metaphysical theories here. It's like, uh, that whole kind of like going back to believers, like, you know, what do you believe? Do you believe, does the afterlife exist? Does it not exist? Are we worm food? Are we quantum? Are we quantum static? You know, what does that all mean? That's a
Right.
much bigger conversation. And thank you, John, for saying that. So, oh gosh, I hate to have to wrap this up soon.
I know, and our hour is already up.
Yeah.
But our time is up.
Yeah.
Sunrise is coming, sort of.
Thank you for saying that. That's a great way to kind of transition towards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is in some time zone. Maybe not ours, but in another one.
Planetary
In
sunrise is coming up.
Brakiri time, it is.
Yeah. See, Terry Lynn Colorado said, yes, but Tracy needed to get some support from the audience after Claudia left.
She did.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much she got, to be honest.
I think from this episode, I think she got more than she probably would have without it. You know, because again, like Lockley was a very kind of cut and dry military personality, and you know, yeah, we got to learn like a few tidbits here and there, like, yeah, she was married to Sheridan, and in some of the smaller details, you know.
Yeah, and at the time, I remember not liking that little factoid about.
I know you don't like that at all.
Just wow, it was a really weird thing, and Lockley's a very different character from Ivanova, and a lot of people were just so pissed that Ivanova was gone that if Lockley felt like a poor replacement, and so we needed to establish her as her own character, and this episode helped do that.
Yeah, there was a lot of baggage that obviously we brought into the 5th season. You know, not necessarily her character. The 5th
and
season.
you know, it's not Joe's fault or anybody's fault. It's not Tracy's fault by any means. Let's acknowledge that.
Oh, totally. And I think that the material that she was given in this episode, I mean, Tracy really hit a home run with just the emotional impact of seeing her best friend
Zoe,
again, and
absolutely. Before we go, I got to acknowledge Slice of Sci-Fi's comments about Ivanova possibly seeing Talia before the break. I mean, assuming that the body doesn't necessarily have to be physically dead.
Mm-hmm.
The conversation between those two, that is the beautiful things that fanfics are made of. That's all I want to say about that.
Terry Lynn Colorado said, my mom who died at 68 miss her so. And I think that's, you know, I'm sorry to hear that, but that's the thing about an episode like this that makes you really kind of like ponder like the bigger issues, you know, like the bigger, more esoteric, ethereal issues. It's like, yes, we're all star stuff, and eventually we will see them again,
Right.
beyond the rim, or where no shadows may fall, and seeing people whole again.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like, okay, if you got to talk to this person, hey, what sort of conversation would ensue?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the fun of it.
So, I know that we have to cut this. I'm so
We gotta
sorry.
go. I'm so sorry,
Summer,
guys.
I'm
We could
so
do this
sorry
another
that
hour.
that I screwed up your timeline. Blamed him. That's not my fault. Blamed him. It's not my fault at all.
It's his fault because he's not here.
Yeah. So
we're so ripping on Tim tonight. I'm sorry.
One of the things that I'd love to have everyone kind of like, chatter on the Twitter is that, if you were part of the Brakiri Day of the Dead, like, how would that experience be for you? Who would you like to see? Who would you not like to see? Who would end?
That's an even better question, is who would you not want to see?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Ooh.
So I have so much more to say, but unfortunately we have to, stick to our planetary sunrise. So
we do. And the bravade is gone. So you know what? Party's over.
There's always another bottle of Brikari, Char.
Shh. Tomorrow's Monday.
That's right. Okay. So, anything left for you? Did we?
I mean, for an hour, we knocked down a lot of good stuff. I think we're good.
Cool. So, make sure that you like and subscribe and share what we're doing here on the Zocalo. Make sure that you follow us on all of our social media, on Twitter, and on. How do you feel about TikTok, Char?
I'm a little bit on the fence because there's been some news articles about TikTok lately. I love what you can do on it. We've gotten some reception on there, but privacy issues are of a big concern to me. And this is a problem with all social networks. They all use your data to some extent. When it's a free product, you're the product.
I know.
But the way they manipulate it is where all the marbles lie. And so we'll discuss that. It may or may not be a thing going forward, unfortunately.
Right on. No, I hear you. For all the fans that are listening, I mean, obviously, John and Terry and Summer, you're all here, and thank you so much, because you guys are fantastic. And for all the people that are going to be watching, or will be downloading this later on, thank you so much for listening to us and supporting us. We're really like we're a little over a year old, and we're really getting somewhere, and I feel so good about like the stuff that we talk about, and it's remarkable. I love being able to do this.
This is fun. Yeah, we're having some great conversations. We have great people chiming in the chat board with us. We really appreciate your input, so please keep it coming. And next week, we don't know what we're doing yet, so we'll make that a surprise. We'll preview it on Twitter. We'll do it on Reddit. And then, of course, once we set everything up on YouTube, you can see the topic of the upcoming episode. But until then, everybody.
Oh, I have to answer one thing. Norm, have you? Terry Lynn said, Norm, have you ever had your father visit you in your dreams? Many times. Many times.
Cool.
Many times. Yeah. So just to leave you with that. Yes, many times. So until next week, and we will have our next topic for you next week. Make sure you follow us on all of our social media channels. Make sure that you read all the comments and the notes below. But until next week, be seeing you.